What if the ship the U.S. Navy once tried to abandon became the one it needed the most? Not the biggest, not the most advanced, not even the most reliable, but the one chosen for the hardest mission, right on the edge of one of the world's most dangerous waterways. Because in modern warfare, perfection can be a liability and imperfection can become a strategy. The story begins with a ship that was never supposed to succeed, built with ambition, marketed as revolutionary, and funded with billions. It promised to redefine naval warfare. A modular warship, fast, adaptable, and flexible. A vessel that could switch roles depending on the mission, anti-submarine, mine warfare, surface combat, all through interchangeable systems. At least, that was the vision. In reality, things didn't go as planned. The modules didn't work as expected. Systems failed integration tests. Maintenance costs climbed. The hull, designed for speed, began showing structural weaknesses. Cracks appeared. Reliability dropped. Confidence followed. Inside defense circles, the ship became a quiet embarrassment. Critics called it unfinished. Some called it a mistake. And within the Navy itself, there were serious discussions about cutting losses and moving on. It was, by many measures, the ship the Navy tried to throw away. But then, the battlefield changed. Far from shipyards and design rooms, a different kind of pressure was building. Tensions in the Middle East were rising again. The waters near Iran, especially the narrow corridor of the Persian Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz, were becoming increasingly volatile. This was an open ocean warfare. This was something else entirely. A confined, heavily monitored, strategically critical environment where every move could trigger escalation. And suddenly, the Navy faced a difficult equation. How do you project power in a place where your most powerful assets are also your most vulnerable? Because the truth is, supercarriers, the giants of the sea, don't belong in tight waters. They are designed for open oceans, for distance, for dominance at range. But in the Persian Gulf, their size becomes a problem. The water is shallow. The space is narrow. The coastline is close. Surveillance is constant. Every movement is visible. Every approach predictable. And more importantly, every large ship becomes a target. Anti-ship missiles can be launched from land. Fast attack boats can swarm from multiple directions. Naval mines, cheap, silent, and devastating, can be deployed with little warning. A supercarrier, despite all its firepower, becomes a high-value, slow-moving target in a confined space. It's not just risk, it's exposure. And in that environment, the Navy needed something different. Not bigger, not stronger, smaller, faster, more flexible, and most importantly, something it could afford to risk. That's when the conversation changed. The very ship that had been labeled a failure started to look useful. Because its flaws weren't just weaknesses. In the right context, they were advantages. The cracked hull, it came from a design focused on speed and reduced weight. That same design made the ship incredibly fast and agile compared to traditional warships. The failed modules? They revealed something unexpected. The ship's architecture, despite its problems, allowed rapid experimentation. Systems could be added, removed, and modified without the long development cycles required for larger vessels. In other words, it wasn't a finished product. It was a platform. And in a new kind of warfare, that mattered more. Because the nature of conflict was shifting. The focus was no longer just on ships versus ships. It was becoming something far more complex. Distributed systems, unmanned platforms, networked operations, swarms instead of singular strikes. And suddenly, this imperfect ship had a role to play. It could move closer to contested areas without carrying the same strategic risk as a carrier. It could deploy new technologies. It could act as a forward node in a larger system. And one of its most important roles began to emerge. Launching drones. Not just surveillance drones, but coordinated systems designed to operate in groups. Airborne drones that could scan, monitor, and even strike. Surface drones that could patrol or intercept. And underwater systems that could operate unseen. The idea wasn't just to use drones. It was to overwhelm, because a swarm changes the equation. Instead of relying on a single expensive platform, you distribute capability across dozens, even hundreds of smaller units. Some will fail, some will be lost, but the system as a whole survives. And this ship became the launch point. Close enough to deploy, small enough to avoid drawing immediate attention, flexible enough to support evolving technology. It wasn't perfect, but it didn't need to be. At the same time, another problem demanded attention. Naval mines. Simple in concept, devastating in effect. A single mine can damage or disable a ship worth billions. A field of them can shut down entire shipping routes. And in a place like the Strait of Hormuz, where a significant portion of the world's oil supply passes through, even a temporary disruption can have global consequences. Traditionally, clearing mines is one of the most dangerous operations in naval warfare. It requires slow, careful movement, specialized ships, human crews operating in high-risk environments. But that too was beginning to change. Robotic minesweepers, unmanned underwater vehicles, were entering the picture, designed to detect, classify, and neutralize mines without putting sailors in direct danger. They were smaller, smarter, and expendable, but they needed a platform, a place to operate from, a ship that could deploy them, coordinate them, and adapt as the mission evolved. Once again, the imperfect ship found its purpose. Now, two missions began to converge. Above the surface, drone swarms extending reach and awareness. Below the surface, robotic systems hunting invisible threats. And in between, a single ship acting as the bridge between them. Not a dominant force, not a centerpiece of power, but a connector, a node in a network. And that network was the real weapon. Because modern warfare is no longer defined by individual platforms alone. It's defined by how systems work together, how information flows, how quickly decisions can be made and executed. And in that environment, flexibility becomes more valuable than perfection. A perfect system is often rigid, built for specific scenarios, optimized for known threats. But an imperfect system, it can adapt. It can evolve in real time. It can be pushed into uncertain environments, tested under pressure, and modified based on what works and what doesn't. And perhaps most importantly, it can be risked, because that's the hidden factor in all of this. Risk. A supercarrier represents enormous investment. Thousands of personnel, billions of dollars. Strategic symbolism. Losing one is not just a tactical setback, it's a global event. But this ship, it operates in a different category. Its loss, while significant, is not catastrophic. Its risk profile allows it to be deployed closer, to take chances, to operate in areas where larger assets would never go. And that changes how it can be used. It becomes a testing ground, a forward operating platform, a tool for experimentation in live environments. And that leads to a deeper realization. The Navy didn't just repurpose a flawed ship. It embraced a new philosophy, the philosophy of the imperfect machine. Instead of aiming for flawless design, it began to accept that modern warfare is too unpredictable for perfection, that systems will fail, that environments will change, that adaptability is not a feature, it's a necessity. And in that context, imperfection is not something to eliminate. It's something to work with, because an imperfect machine can be improved, modified, reimagined. It can carry technologies that don't yet have a permanent home. It can support missions that are still being defined. It can exist at the edge of what is known. And that's exactly where the future of warfare is unfolding. In uncertain zones, in contested waters, in environments where traditional advantages no longer guarantee success. So when the Navy chose this ship for one of its hardest missions, it wasn't settling for less. It was choosing something different, a platform that could move fast, adapt quickly, and operate where others could not. A ship that reflected the reality of modern conflict, not as a finished product, but as an evolving system. And maybe that's the most important shift of all, because the future may not belong to the biggest fleets or the most advanced individual weapons. It may belong to those who can adapt the fastest, who can experiment without hesitation, who can turn flaws into features. So the next time you think about military power, Don't just imagine perfection. Think about imperfection. Because in the narrow waters of the Persian Gulf, where every decision carries risk and every movement is watched, the most broken ship might just be the one that makes the difference. Not because it was perfect, but because it never needed to be.